Welcome to this artist talk. As part of GoMA at Home, we've had a little summer break, so this is the first one back. I'm Katie Bruce. I'm one of the curators at GoMA, and so if I can just ask anyone to mute themselves just now, possibly including my colleague Martin, because we often get feedback from him. Um, and I'll cover the practical things first before introducing our guests for the artist talk this evening. We're recording this conversation and the Q&A session with a plan to put a subtitled version online on our blog. So we do understand if you prefer to keep your video off, that's fine. But if you'd like to keep it on, we'd love to see you as well. And I think Martin, I'm not sure when he's planning he'll start it when I just go into the proper spiel, I imagine. My colleagues Martin and Caroline are here to keep an eye on the chat for questions. Although we've discovered we have actually got the Q&A function as well these days, so WebEx must be upping their game. So please put any questions either in the chat and the Q&A, and we'll monitor them, and then we can ask them at the end of the conversation. Martin and Caroline are also putting in a link for Otter, which is our live transcribing service. And so that link will go into the chat as well for those who need it, and hopefully it copes with all of our accents as well. And as we go along, we'll have a couple of links that might relate to the conversation at the time that we'll also put in the chat as well. So our plan for this evening is to have a conversation, then a space for Q&A, and it should be roughly an hour. So we're grateful for those joining us in different time zones as well. We're here this evening, which I believe is definitely evening in Glasgow, with the artist Jo Ganter and the composer and musician David Rothenberg to talk about their collaboration on the work Urgent Nature, which is currently showing in the exhibition Drinking the Beauty in GoMA. And I'm not sure if anyone's had a chance to go and see it, because I'm not sure where everybody's coming from this evening. But we were watching the trailer for it as you arrived into this online space, and it was just to give you a bit of a flavour of the work as well. Drinking the Beauty is an exhibition, but it comes from the quote, "Drinking the beauty and wonder at the meaning of what you see," which I found through American friends of mine. And it's actually a quote from Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring over 50 years ago, which, if you've not had a chance to read, is a really powerful piece of writing on pesticides at that time, and is sometimes credited with advancing the environmental movement globally. Drinking the Beauty is a collection exhibition with works found in the holdings of Glasgow museums, and it includes recent acquisitions alongside older works, including cyanotypes from Anna Atkins made in the mid-19th century. I was also able to borrow 3 film works, which were kindly lent to us by the artist Jo Ganter, who's here tonight, Jade Montserrat with Webb Ellis, and Amanda Thompson. And the exhibition itself is on until 2022, if you can get a chance to see it. And Jo's work, and specifically Urgent Nature, is on till September the 26th. So not that long to see it. So Urgent Nature combines animated documentary photographs that Jo took of wetland grasses that now inhabit the post-industrial landscape of the banks of the River Carron in Falkirk. And it's got a soundtrack developed by David. Jo's an artist, and you'll be able to see her in the grid or the screen, depending on how you've got this set up. She's been based in Glasgow since the early 1990s, and having moved to Scotland to study at Edinburgh College of Art in 1983. She works with traditional and new media to produce original limited edition etchings, relief prints, and animations. But you can also see one of her works in the exhibition Mono at Glasgow Print Studio, and I'm not sure how long it's on for, but I popped in the other week, and it's definitely worth a visit for Jo's work, but also the others that are there. Since 2014, she's collaborated with musicians to create graphic scores, images that replace traditional music scores to direct improvised music. And I guess she'll speak more about that and how that led to collaboration with David. David Rothenberg, delighted that he's able to join us today from the other side. stateside, has written and performed on the relationship between humanity and nature for many years. He's the author of a number of books, and probably people not familiar with his broader work may know the work Why Birds Sing on making music with birds, which was turned into a feature-length BBC TV documentary, and you can find that online as well. Thousand Mile Song is on making music with whales, and that was turned into a film for French TV, and also publishes, including Nightingales in Berlin from 2019 and The Possibility of Reddish Green from 2020. As a composer and jazz clarinetist, he's got more than 30 CDs out under his own name, but he's also invited many musical colleagues to join him on different collaborations, and including on Whale Music Remixed, with contributions from noted electronic artists such as Scanner, DJ Spooky, Lucas Ligeti, Mira Calix, Ben Neal and Robert Rich. And I'm delighted that both Jo and David are able to join us here for this talk. And my plan is to ask a few questions, a little bit more about the how and the why and the what, and the interests and the process. So, and then we'll open it up to questions at the end. So I'll begin. I first saw Urgent Nature online. I was sent it probably coming up for a couple of years ago now, in that way that 2020 has lost a lot of time for all of us, by colleagues. And I was watching on a computer screen, which I know is not ideal, but I was completely drawn by the wonderful immersive aesthetics that were there in it, and the sound and everything kind of drew me in. But I was also working on Drinking the Beauty, and it was in its fairly early stages. And it just was a nice synergy around about that time of thinking about how this work would be perfect for the show. So got in contact with Jo, and I guess my first question is, Jo, you didn't make it for inclusion in this exhibition. It very much the work came before the show. And how do you feel about being included in a show like Drinking the Beauty? Whereas my thinking developed, it more and more the focus was on climate change, which is not necessarily the focus of your work here.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you. And I hope you can all hear me perfectly well. Urgent Nature was, well, it didn't start off being called Urgent Nature. I thought up that title towards the very end of the making, and I was making that film for possibly 2 years, but the gestation period was much longer, in that I was taking photographs, just still photographs of a new area of the wetland grasses, as you said, around Falkirk. And I am aware of climate change. Everyone is now, and it does mean something to me. But I was simply taking these photographs, not even as an artist. I was just taking them as everybody takes photographs. And it was only because I realized I'd got so many photographs that, in a sense, I wanted to do something with them. And that area is an area that means a lot to my partner, who grew up there. And his memory of it was as an extremely polluted place, because the largest ironworks in Europe used to be there. And this new area that's been, if you like, rewilded and made into this beautiful spot where people walk through is a result of that cleanup operation of an ironworks. So it was filthy, and there were no bird song, and there was no deer. But now there are all those things. But it's still got that man-made feel to it, which I love. And the largest part of my practice as an artist is abstract. So apolitical, very formal, very much about composition. And I look at nature for the abstract and for geometry. So this landscape presented me with woodlands where all the trees are planted in grid lines, absolutely beautiful straight lines. And I have to admit, I find that beautiful, even as I can almost think of it as wrong. in this sort of notion of climate change today, where we should want things to be wild. This was not wild. It was beautiful and it was nature, but it was distinctly man-made and a sort of post-industrial hybrid. But, you know, the fantastic thing of seeing the fact that this was now clean, I mean, and that contrast, you know, there was one evening we were walking along at the side of the trees, and on one side of us, there was just a fence and then lots of houses. And on the other side of us, there was just a meter of trees before the Carron River. And drinking at the river was this enormous stag. And he just turned and looked at us. And we both stopped transfixed, that it was just a magical moment. And that, you know, this creature, this perfectly wild creature was living there in amongst these paths that are organized for us to go for our nice Sunday walks and all of that. So I became very connected with that area, and I started looking at it for the sort of grid patterns and matrices that I like drawing. And it became fixed on certain aspects of it, particularly the wetland grasses, which have these strong verticals and then these horizontal flags moving off them. And something that I come to in my art all the time is that relationship between things that are extremely structured and organized. So in one sense, all these blades of grass are exactly the same, but in another sense, they're all absolutely unique, slightly different organic shapes and slightly different tones and textures. And so all of that, it was a very personal, private thing that I was doing. And how could I quite egocentrically make you see this world the way that I saw it? And that really traditional thing, I think, that artists do, of trying to get you to look at nature for maybe things that you'd pass, things that you wouldn't notice, really making you look at it for longer. But then also, as you said, I was making graphic scores. So I began to trace lines through the grasses and along the flags of the leaves coming off the grasses, and think, well, how can I make you see that? And then it was just almost seemed natural to me, because I had been working with, actually at the time, with Marilyn Crispell and with David on a project that was based around graphic scores from her landscape in Woodstock, New York, in fact. It was called Gradations of Light. But the trees around Woodstock are those sort of spindly silver birches that fall over quite a lot. So you get all these beautiful verticals, and then suddenly you get this extravagant horizontal. And I'd been drawing grids that related to that, that Marilyn was then really composing music for. And David, she invited along and introduced him to me, because she knew he worked with nature and with birdsong, and also, though, with electronic music, and she wanted to learn electronic music. And going back to your climate change, and what I should do to actually answer your question, Katie, is, yeah, I'm delighted to have my work in this exhibition, because it frames it within the context of climate change, but without my work having to kind of compromise to be conceptually dryly about that issue. It can simply be its hopefully beautiful self. But your exhibition frames it in a context that I think is very important. And also, I think if you're making artwork now that focuses on landscape, couldn't not be seen as somehow relevant to this huge conversation that's omnipresent now about the effects of climate change within this landscape.
Yeah. And it also opened up from, I'm getting feedback. I don't know if that's me.
It's possibly me.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, it opened up a conversation with a colleague of mine, a curator of zoology, about what is biodiversity, because again, these reclaimed industrial lands have an incredible biodiversity, and that way that we think about the landscape or nature as being almost pristine or rural, but actually some of these spaces have incredible biodiversities that actually have formed and become at danger if we decide to do something, or if we decide to disrupt what is now a new biodiversity there. So yeah, it kind of, it's really interesting how your drive to make a really beautifully aesthetic work that it made us look. And I think when I first saw it, I hadn't realized they were photographs. They had much more movement and depth in them than that. And it
Yeah.
was quite a shock to realize that it had come from something so still. And
Yeah,
yet,
I mean, I don't have filmmaking, and I haven't had my animation skills were entirely self-taught. So it was like, well, can I do this? And can I make you see it through this way? But I think the joy of working with musicians is to actually bring time and movement into my artwork, and so I really did want to use that. I also love David's music, and I want him to talk some about that. And I really wanted to use that, if you like, that switch, the movement that we could get between the natural sound of his clarinet, but also the electronic sounds, as a kind of comparison between that post-industrial hybrid of natural but in grids, you know. So that's how we worked a little bit.
well, this is maybe a nice point to
Mm.
bring in a question for David. And I know Jo's obviously talked about why she really wanted to work with you on this, but how did you get involved in Urgent Nature, and what drew you to work with Jo on this particular artwork? Sorry, I think you might need to unmute yourself.
Me. Great. Yeah. Thanks so much. And thanks so much for putting this event on. And Jo, thank you for inviting me to do all these collaborations. It started with Marilyn Crispell in Woodstock, and she said, just invite David to come here. He'll play some bug sounds and weird electronic things. And that's how it started. We worked on gradations of light, which made its way into this whole exhibit about graphic scores in Woodstock, which I think was really a Scottish-American collaboration. And it was really fun to bring all these unusual ways of writing down sound put together. We got historic things together, new works, and we played all this music, performing these scores that you and Marilyn put together. And then you started talking about this project. You said it's going to take me many years because I've got to learn animation, these photographs. It's a painstaking process. I'm going to draw digitally on them bit by bit. It's going to take years. You want to do it? I said, yeah, sure, absolutely. And it's so nice to hear that music and see that little preview of it, thinking about, even listening to, oh boy, this was made in a different time when we took it for granted we could just travel over and do it. It really sounded that way to me, like, well, it doesn't have the sense of impossibility or implausibility that happens now when I'm collaborating with people I don't even get to see because we can't travel anywhere. And I think that I've always been interested in the connection between music and nature, and also playing around with it, not sort of leaving it alone. And I think I reluctantly got interested in electronic sounds because I thought there's this way you can make them reveal something natural by being totally artificial, like it's a challenge. It makes you think in ways you don't expect. Kind of, you're playing sounds, you don't quite know what to do with them. A lot of these sounds, when I first started doing that, I tended to use all samples of natural sounds. And after a while, particularly working with insects, I realized that insect sounds are a lot like electronic sounds. They're sort of made the same way as we talk about synthesizers. And so a lot of these sounds you just heard fragments of are kind of electronically created things that are supposed to sound like imaginary creatures or somehow sort of alive, even though they're totally artificial. Like I'm looking for this impossibility. And I think that it's great to be in a show about climate change because everybody, artists and non-artists, everyone feels like we're not doing enough on this problem. So anything that recognizes the connection between these little things we're doing to get people to pay attention to nature, realize the beauty in looking at the natural world, listening to it in a slightly different way, any way that can connect to this giant problem of our time feels like a good thing. I always feel it's not enough. Like, what would it mean to do enough, to do art and music about climate change? Who knows? It's just such a difficult situation to know exactly whether we can do enough, what kind of response. I mean, and when people ask me, how does your work connect to this? I usually say it's just one little way to pay more attention to the natural world. And the more we pay attention to it, maybe we'll value it a little bit more and realize we have to do something. but I don't think that's enough. It's, how could it be enough? Recently, I talked to a musician who started something called Climate Keys. She's a keyboardist and British living in France. And she got so worked up on this, she changed her concertizing to have half the performance be a concert and the rest getting the whole audience to talk about what we should do about this problem. Like she changed her whole artistic activity because she really felt art should somehow address climate change. So we can't even have a concert. We should go and talk about this problem and come up with something to do, which is an interesting movement. I think a lot of people really are wondering, can we do enough? So I think these art and nature projects, if they encourage us to pay closer attention to something we otherwise would miss, like this little sound here, this leaf, is it moving, is it still? All of it can help its own way.
Sorry, the clunkiness of muting and muting. That was quite amazing, and setting off different thoughts in my head as well. I mean, with Drinking the Beauty, I didn't start out necessarily around about climate change, and again, like Jo's work, a lot of the work in the exhibition, it's not directly about the climate emergency. Anna Atkins' work is from the middle of the 1800s, so the middle of the Industrial Revolution, and therefore not thinking about climate change in the way that we are now. But I think, yeah, it is that question about there are limits to what museums and contemporary spaces can do, but we are also a catalyst for the idea of conversation or noticing or observing or starting something to make change. So it's really nice to sort of hear about other ways. Yeah, I'm quite moved by that idea that you go to a concert and half the time you spend talking about actions that you'll make for change. And I guess there's a festival in Edinburgh at the minute, that's about to launch, that is one action to make change, and that idea of small yet significant things that we can do to have an effect somehow or other in the longer term.
I mean, in a way, museums have no limits. You get this captive audience. They come in to experience something new. Look at the Guggenheim Museum. They invited Rem Koolhaas to do this whole show about the countryside. This guy knows absolutely nothing about the countryside. He's designed scary buildings all over the world. He said, no, I don't care about that anymore. It's the land, the people. This exhibit had so much information. It was so much not like an art exhibit. There was like no Rem Koolhaas in it. It was just information, stories from China, photographs. You know, it was exactly what they didn't expect, I'm sure. Had nothing to do with architecture and everything to do with finding things out around the world and saying, in this art museum, we're going to have an information-heavy exhibit about what's wrong with the world today. I don't think that's what they signed up for, and some people didn't like it. I thought it was great. I could have spent days in there. There was so much unusual stuff. And they said, we don't want a giant book to go with it. Nobody wants a giant book. They're expensive. We're going to make the whole thing this big. So he had this very small book, Countryside in Your Pocket, with this vast exhibit compressed. And, you know, so he's playing with a lot of stuff there. And I think somewhere they said, we can do anything in this museum. So you got a museum, you can do anything.
Oh, that's probably the quote that I need to keep us going in these times when I'm in my back room, having not being in the museum.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that is really interesting, thinking about how we limit ourselves on that. I'll move back into our questions, because I'm sure otherwise we'll end up taking all the time and there'll be no room for others. But Jo, I mean, you've talked a little bit about your sources for urgent nature. But also I mean, David's referenced it, that it was going to take years, but it did take you about 2 years. So, I mean, how did you make this work, given the sources that you had?
I literally made it. I mean, I think the brilliant thing now actually is with a computer, basically an iMac, that other computers are available, I believe, and Photoshop and Final Cut Pro. So with 2 pieces of software and a computer, you can make a film now. or at least ways I felt that I should be able to, if I could just master how to do it. And I'm sure I did it the slowest way, certainly at first. I got better sort of during the progression of it, just technically. But I took 6 still photographs of largely of close-ups of the common reed I discovered later. I was calling them just, they were sort of these shoulder-high wetland grasses. And again, I realize now that I was photographing them because I'm a very two-dimensional artist, actually. My work, it's not flat, but I always deal with images that are parallel to the picture plane. So I was photographing them so they were parallel to the picture plane of the photograph, if that makes sense. So I basically had a layer of grass or a layer of the dogwood in what I lovingly call my green tangle at the end of the which is probably the best part. But it was, I photographed that in a very two-dimensional way because, and I didn't do that, I don't think purposely, but I realize now I did it, and it made it look as much as possible like the abstract grids I was drawing for Marilyn Crispell's graphic scores, where I would make up an abstract matrix of just lines, verticals, and the occasional diagonal, and then Marilyn would actually insert shapes that signified sound for her. So we both actually collaborated on the image in that piece of work, that collaborative piece. And I only started collaborating at all with anybody in 2014, and I did it first with Raymond MacDonald, a saxophonist. And Raymond always wants to have part of the image, and I have part of the musical instruction, and so the collaboration is quite porous. And that was absolutely brilliant and introduced me to so many different ways of working. But it was also very frustrating because I couldn't do exactly what I wanted, which is what I'm so used to as an artist. Raymond also works very spontaneously. He really is an improviser. Marilyn went towards composition. So she really wanted to take this matrix and decide where to put sound in it and how she would play it, and what sounds she wanted, which is why she invited David to be part of it. And also it took on the theme of the landscape, as opposed to simply being about music for musicians, or about the direction of musicians in a very abstract way. And that began to interest me more. And with this piece, I mean, I think part of the reason I invited David, very much mainly because I just loved the work. I thought, because the work was electronic, a lot of it, we could email the collaboration backwards and forwards. And also because I thought that David would be far more tolerant of me being slow and give me his music and let me kind of work on it, use it then for hours and hours and hours making this without wanting to make an intervention. So we, if you like, that collaboration is perhaps less porous, thanks to David's generosity with the material he gave me, in fact. So I took these photographs and I called it at first moving stills. So I knew that I got these still photographs, and I knew that I wanted to, if you like, I wanted to draw along the stems of the grasses and make your eye travel with me. So movement had to be, and I had this notion of what it would look like. I just didn't, and I kind of knew how to do it because I had done some animation of abstract images, and I knew it was going to be long and painful. And it's like, how much do you commit to something that's going to take that long to craft when you're not sure? But you know, eventually you just do. So it did take me a while. It's about, it's traditional stop motion, but digital. So I would say there's about 10,000 JPEGs involved, which is 10,000 still images. And so, but you know, my first job was to take one still image and select, using photograph, every single blade of grass which was in the front and in focus, which was the foreground, if you like, of this shallow space. And so that I could then select tiny little bits of a stem and simply increase the saturation. So all the color, sometimes it looks very artificial because I have really increased the saturation, but I haven't ever sort of painted it, if you like. It is the saturation of the actual grass as it was, virtually always. I think I'd go wild with a bit of blue at one point, but that's all. And then incrementally change, tiny bit more in the next still, tiny bit more. And then it is magic animation, because then when you run it together, there's this woo. But to get it to go slow and at the speed and synchronize with the music, which is what I'm quite obsessive about. So Georgia is now present and sitting on my screen, would come home and I would say, what have you done today? And I'd been working on it all day. And I would say, look, watch, don't take your eyes off the screen. And it'd go, whew. That'd be it. That's all I'd done all day. But so long as it matched and it was like, it began to make sense to me. And then, of course, the more I did, the more I then took more photographs, knowing, especially of the dogwood at the end, where it's all buzzing green and very electronic. I knew exactly what I wanted to do with that bush when I photographed it, because by that time I'd enough experience, if you like. I don't know that it matters. I think craft is really quite important in artwork sometimes, but it's never what I want the spectator necessarily to see. I think, you know, it's not a better artwork because I spent hours and hours and hours on it. It's got to look, the best artworks look like they're easy. So I hope it looks reasonably easy. And I love the fact that you don't know that it's still photographs necessarily, you know, that I've made the movement hopefully good enough, and the changes in light and the background layers and things like that, so that it becomes filmic. Because you know, it matters to me from a practical sense how long it took me, in that it would be just even more upsetting if it was terrible at the end of it. But at the same time, that's not what makes it a good artwork necessarily. Things that you make very quickly can sometimes be so much better, and that's just the sadness of it. But you have to realize they come out of the experience of all the other making you do.
That's really interesting. Because as well, I don't realize that the colors that were present already in the photographs were what made the changes in the animations. I made an assumption that you'd painted. So it's really, you know, when we're talking about those innate kind of elements that you take notice of, or that you play with and you kind of work with. Yeah, that's really nice. And I guess when I've forgotten the name of the plan you were talking about at the end, which is the most, I suppose, electronic and visual there. And I guess, you know, David, you'd already kind of briefly spoken about that idea of taking your source material from both nature, but then moving it into electronic. But where were a lot of the sources that came for this particular work, and how does the collaboration with Jo inform the process of composing? Because I know she said it was slightly different. It wasn't as porous as her other projects, but for you, what did it mean to compose knowing that there'd be this extended period of work that Jo would be doing with what you were making? Sorry, I think.
I mean, one thing that excited me, you know, when we started doing it, I have a use for all these weird sounds now, because it's unclear what to do with them. For me, who's used to performing, when people really want you to play an actual instrument, when you put in the electronic sounds, it's like, what is that, you know? And that we had these images that were nature based, and you try out these strange electronic sounds, and we'd say like, yeah, you know, this makes sense for this. And some of it we did together in person in Glasgow, like, let's try this out. Like, I had these ideas, and they were the kinds of things I had been playing around with, but not sure what to do with them, because they seemed like artificial nature things, and like, what do we do with this? And I never saw it as like, you know, usually you're doing film music, they tell you exactly what to do. It's like 12 seconds here, it has to be this thing, you know. It's totally not made in this you know, it's not entirely, you know, imporous, you know, because we just try these things out, rather than it's less porous than if I said, oh, I want to do the visual parts, and, you know, and Jo, you have to make some sound. That's the Ray McDonald approach, you know. And this is so in that sense, it is less porous, but it's really a way to try out all these sounds that are supposed to be, they are kind of natural like, but their actual purpose was never clear. We're often told now every piece of music has to have some purpose, you know. This makes you study better. This is going to put you to sleep. This wakes you up. You know, everything is functional. And yet much of the music I was doing has no function at all. And we're not even sure if anyone's playing it. Is it a machine or a human? But I kind of liked that it had something to do with nature. So we had these images that were made in this painstaking way, you know, that it seemed like the perfect use for it. And what you were saying, Joe, reminded me of this documentary I saw about Miyazaki, you know, the great Japanese animator of all these beautiful nature-based kids movies, and how he's railing against computers in this film. He's just whining about them, like, this is nonsense. You can't make animation that way. I don't care how easy it is. You have to draw everything. That's what makes these things work, you know. And of course someone's going to see your work and say, oh, we could just get some AIs, get the computer to do this for you. It'll be so simple. Increase the saturation, automatically find the leaves, you know. And you'd say, like, no, it's going to look like the computer is doing that. You know, the fact that it's painstaking does, I think, add something to it. I think it does. I have to turn you on now.
Oh,
but, yeah, right.
Yes. Yes. No, I think so. It is, again, and I totally agree with you about the functionlessness usually of art. I mean, maybe we put meaning for each other into this piece. But we sat with the still photographs, and I sort of had this notion I wanted to go in and out of what might be more natural sound into really electronic sound and back again as this metaphor for this hybrid landscape that was partly artificial and part not. But, you know, that specificity of the craft. So I you know, for every little section that I was heightening the saturation of on a blade of grass or a leaf, I was so wanting it not to be too artificial or too crude. So I had to work out, I'd select it with no pixels feathering at all, really, really precisely. So, but if I'd have left it all like that, it would have looked really too sharp at the edges, like I had painted it. So I then had to feather the selection. People who've done my Photoshop course, and I can see at least one student here, brilliant, is we'll know what that means, but you soften the edge of your selection so it shades in and out of that greater saturation. So you know, in the end, it's about caring enough about what this is going to be. And I think crafting is always that. It's respecting your subject matter and having that ambition for it. That if you're going to do this, you've to do it well. And you know, there isn't a better time perhaps to at least respect nature in that. In my small way, that was what it was. That was my respectfulness of nature. And in another way, that bright, extravagant use of color, and especially that really electronic swirling, sort of spiraling, green spiraling, which is about as far away from what I might normally have in what Duncan Macmillan has described as my very restrained artwork. You know, but it took me to that. David's sound took me somewhere I would never have gone, and all of these, and between that and the actual shapes produced in nature, in the dogwood itself. So all of these comes, and it makes art a journey. You know, that you have to go with the medium and the people that you're collaborating with, and the influences from all different aspects of your own artwork and other people's artwork. And the environment you're working in. I'm gabbling now. Someone stop me.
No, it's fine. I had a really lovely conversation with the artist Nicholas Scrutton today. And again, it's about that idea of working outside of your comfort zone with others that push you into thinking slightly differently about your own core passions. And I think that idea of care, because I suppose we spoke quite a lot in the beginning about the size and the scale of seeing the work.
Yes.
And I'd seen it on the computer, but then you were doing a studio showing, of the work, and it was really quite incredible to go into that space. And
yeah, it was even larger in my studio, I think, than in the gallery that time, and we had huge speakers, which I did enjoy. I enjoyed it because that's the first time I'd seen it projected properly. I'd sort of sneaked into lecture theatres and projected it, because again, when you make a movement on your computer screen, you're worried when it's projected bigger that it won't work in the same way. It'll be too big, or it'll be too crude, or you'll need even more still images to make it move smoothly, and all of that. So I did need to test it out projected, but it was fantastic to see it that first time myself in the studio. And what the difference it made, that actually Jackie Perry, another artist in the exhibition Drinking the Beauty, sort of said, well, Joe, it just changes it from you drawing it like this, like something you draw in your sketchbook in a very intimate way, to something that you're practically dancing, so that the movement is so big that the gesture is your full arm. And of course, she's absolutely right. I didn't quite realize that would be the case until I saw it projected. And then I realized that I really only wanted people to see it projected, a proper scale, as it were, because that is the artwork in that sense.
I think we talked about this point opening it up to any questions from anybody, because I'm aware that
yeah, it's going up to 9. So if anyone wants to ask anything, please.
Please do, because otherwise I'll hoggle all the questions. And we've got both Jo and David here that can talk about this work or their practice as well.
You can always type in the chat if you're shy of speaking or you can't unmute.
Well, I would just say one thing, that the musicians are more used to collaboration.
That's
They're always
true.
doing things together, because they kind of recognize that you can immediately create some sounds together you couldn't do apart. You combine ideas more, kind of. It's a sort of more accepted as a practice. And then I think more and more visual artists are thinking about it now to see what happens. And I think it is really fun. I find it very exciting to collaborate with people in different media, different kinds of work than what I'm used to.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, I crave occasionally to escape collaboration and make something that's just mine.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
at the same time, I so much better for having collaborated, and so enjoy it when I do. It's brilliant, and it has altered what I do quite a lot, I think, since I started collaborating with musicians. Not mostly, it may be more because of the movement it's introduced with the animation than perhaps for the still images, though my still images as well.
But I suppose, yeah, I kind of understand that the visual arts is probably the one where we collaborate least, or our relationships are often the shortest. We move on because sorry,
I think we're brought up through art education, or used to be anyway, not so now, but we're brought up almost to believe in the isolated genius, or your personal handwritten romantic thing that only you can express, and that's quite a burden. I think the nicest thing about collaboration is the shared responsibility. This thing isn't all yours, it is something shared. But I studied history of art, and they collaborated much better, I think, in Renaissance and pre-Renaissance times, to create whole chapels and cycles of frescoes, and using apprentices, and all the things that we kind of, the romanticism stopped. But
yeah, I suppose the workshop.
exactly.
And going with that, but I still think sorry, we're probably going off, and apologies if this isn't of interest in the wider group. But I was thinking, because yeah, there is that, but there's still the kind of the genius artist that would get to paint the Virgin or the main figures, and everybody else would do it.
Oh yeah.
Whereas I get the feeling, this collaboration isn't quite like isn't
No,
quite like that. There's a
no,
kind
no.
Not the genius artist, okay.
or the genius artists held on to their own. I don't know.
Yes, no, absolutely. No, I think now we insist on a greater equity or something like that anyway. But yes, but there's a certain flexibility. And the great thing about this is that it's been quite malleable, because I mean, I also went to New York at one point just before all of this started to do a final edit of the music. Well, that was my excuse.
Yeah.
When I was on sabbatical from the university. And so we did project it through XIX Collective on a dome, didn't we? And that was amazing.
We did the dome, that's true, yes.
So,
Right.
so it was projected onto a ceiling above us that was quite small and dome-shaped. Yeah. So this immersive all-round, if you can imagine my grasses and tangles above you on the ceiling and all around you as if you were in a small tent almost. And David and musicians playing in the middle freely in response to the recorded music. So that was kind of crazy. And I described myself earlier as a very two-dimensional artist, and I think I knew it wasn't kind of what I intended, but at the same time, it was an extraordinary thing, and I sort of loved it on a different level. And
it might have been interesting in a giant dome.
Yeah.
If it made like vast, all cut and paste in different triangles and things like that.
I think I think when I first started it, I was going to be much more adventurous on actually the editing of the film. Once I'd got the film made, I was going to cut and chop and edit it and make it more filmic. I think I thought I would have to. And at some point, I forget when, in the middle maybe of this project, Tacita Dean had her 3 exhibitions down in London. Obviously, her work is extraordinarily different to mine, but I went down and saw those 3 exhibitions in quite an intense 2-day period. And I think I came away thinking, I'm trying to make this too complicated. I can actually just have the courage to animate a few still photographs and not feel that I have to check. Because I thought at first, if I was going to make a moving image from still photographs, I'd need almost a different still photograph every, I don't know, 30 seconds or 10 seconds even, just to make it move. And then I realized that actually, no, I could be this really simple, because the technique is simple. It's arduous, but what it actually is simple. And I always encourage students to think, it doesn't have to be a complicated thing. The idea then has to take over, because the simpler it is and the more you can perfect that technique, then the technique of it can disappear and it becomes just what it is. And then the artwork can take over.
There's a work related to this one that's up in Berlin now, in the famous club Berghain. And the work is by a Danish artist, Jakob Kutz Stensen, and it's called Barrel, Berl, B-E-R-L. And it has like 10 giant screens with images of wetlands, computer transformed, where things go in between nature, realistic things, and totally artificial images and completely weird sounds. And it's got a huge amount of artificial intelligence making it happen. And I found it total overkill, like so much technology, that it made me think of our piece, like, you don't need all that.
No.
It's an incredibly complicated, expensive, and kind of beautiful thing that they did there, but it's too much. And there's one room where it all is dark and all you hear is sounds, and it's much more effective because it's much more, the technology overwhelms that particular work. There's a huge book about what it has to do with climate change and science. He got particular digitally scanned objects from the Museum of Natural History, put them in his video images, made kind of imaginary mushrooms that appear, and he's got all these collaborators, and it's like, what is it? You look at it and you think, whoa, this is just too much.
Yeah.
You should all see it. Go see it and see what you think. But it definitely shows you don't need more technology to make the better work.
The advantage, David, of working with me is that I couldn't do that. So
No, you wouldn't want to. You wouldn't say like this is you wouldn't say I need all this to make this happen.
No, I think I began to say earlier, or maybe I didn't get out and say it, but yes, that almost intimacy that you can now make a film in a really intimate, personal, private way.
Yeah.
And just the way that you would make a painting, and not letting them see it till you wanted them to.
Have you thought of sending it to film festivals, the kind of festivals that like this abstract works, and see what they would think of it as a film? Because I would recommend that. I think it's not very difficult, and then people just see it all over the world, and it's their problem setting it up, how they show it. And sometimes they make these amazing, digital cinema packages for you and show them on these incredible screens far off parts of the world. Like, I recommend trying that out, seeing what people think.
Mm-hmm. Well, now it's had its premiere at GoMA.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jo. I know you were saving that one for us.
Oh, totally, totally. Oh no, and actually, we should mention that it was for the 25th anniversary, which I don't think I realised until the exhibition opened. So that was really brilliant.
Yeah, and I always think, well, with GoMA, because we've had a lot of reflection over the last year about artists that we've shown and we've worked with, and subjects that we've looked at through our work. We're not necessarily spectacular, spectacular. I think there's kind of, as you were going back to saying about care and simplicity, and it kind of cuts to the heart of what you're looking at. And I guess even through the last year, and we were going to show Urgent Nature as part of Drinking the Beauty before COVID happened, so this is nothing to do with it. But in that way, when you're talking about that noticing and care and walks and spending time with certain things, and actually coming back out into the real world can be overwhelming, and you kind of want to go back into those simple motions of repeating a walk, or simple motions of seeing something again. And I think it's got real meaning, that work, to spend time with it. And I think that's what kind of drew it to me initially. It opened, like I said, it opened up conversations with colleagues in zoology and natural history and other conversations about industrial history, or kind of Scottish history, and changing uses of landscape as well. But at the heart of it, it was just an incredibly beautiful work that draws you in from the start. So,
well, that's all I wanted it to be. So that's brilliant. Actually, what I discovered as well when I visited David was that he lives in a very similar post-ironworks environment, which was an odd sort of comparison, which I didn't know about until I visited him in upstate New York. And
yeah, it's all reclaimed landscape. It's much wilder than it was, with some sense of hope that we can reclaim these very industrial spots and
yeah,
as you said earlier, bring in new biodiversity and help the landscape recover.
Well, they do really show what you can do quite quickly. And from that point of view, it can be really optimistic, which is quite rare for me. Reading about the climate and the environment, it's quite difficult to be optimistic. But then you go somewhere like that, and if you have any knowledge of what it was like, just less than a generation back, and how quickly it has been reclaimed into something amazing, even though it's still very man-made, and you can always hear the hum of cars in the background. At least there is some equitability there now, and a huge improvement. So
nobody has any questions? I mean, isn't this a puzzling,
very quiet
and work? It's all very clear to everyone.
We've silenced them with. It's quite a difficult forum, these. I'm sure we'd have more if we were all in a room. But I do hope people will go and see the film in GoMA in the next week, if they possibly can.
How come it says on the website it's open until January?
Well, the whole exhibition, Drinking the Beauty, is open till January.
Yeah.
But the next film, another artist's film, will start from the 27th of September. I couldn't be selfish about this. I could actually, but Katie wouldn't let me. So that's
You
fun.
know, it's great to name it after a quote from Rachel Carson, because she's really such an important and interesting figure who wrote very beautifully and eloquently about nature and used that method to get the world to realize the dangers of pesticides, when all these companies were saying it's all perfectly safe, don't worry, nothing wrong here. And but instead of saying, just saying this terrible information, she just wrote so beautifully about what was important about nature and how it was you know under siege. She used beauty, in a art in a literary sense, to wake people up, and that's why she's seen as one of the founders of the environmental movement. It was beauty that got it moving, not just pragmatic concern.
Yeah. And I think, isn't that proof that the sort of almost traditional notion of beauty in art can also be put to use as well, in making us pay attention and care about what we're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a good note to conclude on.
Yeah, no, I think that is that is really nice. And again, I read Silent Spring in lockdown last year, and it was really powerful, thinking that it was 50 years ago that was written. But I was also looking at the artwork of Aubrey Williams, who we've just acquired for the collection, who was writing in the mid-60s about Shostakovich and universalism and abstraction through his painting, and the work of pre-Columbian and others from his Guyanese heritage, about how that informed his thinking. And again, thinking that was 50 years ago, where he was talking about looking to past civilizations to learn particularly about that boom and bust and self-destruction of humanity. And it's quite, so yeah, I think that idea of care and learning. So maybe if we end there, because I'm aware we'll just keep going. And I think Martin's just asked, I can play the trailer as we leave for people that maybe arrived and missed it. And I think you can find more about the work on Jo's website as well. So the link should be earlier back in the chat as well. So yeah, can I just say thank you so much, Jo and David, for this. It was really lovely. It's the first time I've met David as well, so
Nice to
it
meet
was really good to see you have this conversation, which I'm quite sure would have been different in a space, but if you come over to Glasgow again, you know where we are, so we can hopefully have it in person next time.
Yeah, let's do something.
Yeah, absolutely. One of these days, hopefully soon.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
All right. Thank you ever so much, David. Lovely to see you.
Okay. Thank you. I'll just start sharing just now.
Okay.
Sorry, Ellis, sorry, I'm still working. Sorry, you might just have heard my daughter in the background.
Oh, that's fine.
Right, I'll share this screen again.
Okay.